Gerard O'Connell from America Media, your Vatican correspondent. You cover the church and all of the developments, all of the things that are happening here, and it's always wonderful to have you on Salt and Light Television, so thanks for doing this.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, there's so much to talk about. Let's take a look at the Synod of Bishops, what's been happening over the past 3 weeks. There's a lot of people who are very interested in what's happening. They're following it closely, and people want to know what's going to come out of it. But when you look over these past 3 weeks, how would you explain to somebody on the outside what exactly has been happening?
Well, I think we've seen something that we haven't seen since the Second Vatican Council. You've seen, I've covered synods since 1985, every single synod. I've never seen such freedom, such openness inside the synod, but also the possibility that any participant could speak to journalists, could give their talks to journalists. There was an atmosphere of openness. Sure, we didn't see everything that happened inside the synod, but you get the clear sensation that the synod fathers, maybe they didn't quite understand at the beginning, but now I've spoken to a lot of them, and it's near the end of the synod. They understand that this is what the New York Times called today a pivotal moment in the church. Pope Francis believes in opening processes. And one of the processes he's opening is to have a synodal church. That's a church where the bishops, the priests, the lay people, and the Pope, they're all walking together to try and listen to what God is saying to them in the history of humanity today, and also to try to discern how the church should best proclaim the gospel, bring Jesus' message to the people. And so what we're seeing here is a whole process of not just listening, but also trying to discern the pathway ahead. I think those who expect everything to finish on Saturday when the bishops produce their final document and give it to the Pope really are badly mistaken. This is the beginning. 2 years we've had as a start. This is now an important stage, but it's not the end. And I think what the Pope is hoping, from what I've heard him say, is that the bishops in the different countries begin to develop the listening process that started with this synod, and begin to listen and not just teach the people. Because the Pope has made very clear that it's not just that one teaches and the other follows, teachers and student. The Pope said the learners have also got something to teach, and that it's important that the teachers are listening to the students. Anybody who's worked in a college or university understands this.
Right.
But somehow we've had a position in the church for many decades where we teach, you follow. And there's been some dialogue, I don't deny that, but the Pope is really accentuating this and said, from his keynote speech last Saturday, I think it will go down in history as one of the very important speeches he has given. He says, we want a synodal church, a church that is listening and walking with the people. And this is a church that comes close. And of course, the reaction of people outside, we've just come back from the Cuba and the United States visit, but in July we were in Ecuador, Paraguay, Bolivia, and you see the people are listening. They're coming. They feel that he is somehow connecting with them. I remember being in Ecuador in the main square at Mass, and there was alongside me this poor woman and young woman, and she said, I've come to listen to him. She says, he's with us, with the people who have nothing. And she said, I'm helping my sister bring up her 2 girls. I'm working as a cleaner in a restaurant. And he's reaching these people. And in fact, when he was in Washington, they told me, one of the correspondents there, the foreign correspondents, said, here they call him the Pope of the non-believers. In Latin America, they call him the Pope of the poor.
Yeah.
But this Pope is reaching beyond, and this is what he's communicating in this synod, that, as he said when he was in the pre-conclave speech that had a big impact perhaps on his election, he said very clearly, the church has to go out. You've got to reach people. And he's stated time and time again that reality is more important than ideas. And in Cuba, he said, we serve people, not ideas. And so this is a question of doctrine, because doctrine or ideas, the formulation of church teaching in ideas. But we serve people. We try to bridge that seeming gap between, but doctrine is lived. It's not frozen.
Right.
And I think this is what's come through very strongly in this synod.
Right. Now, you mentioned a lot of things there that we definitely need to go into a little bit more deeply. But the first thing that comes to my mind when you talk about how this synod in particular is a development and it's open in a way that you haven't seen before in the past, what does that suggest about what the synods have or have not been doing over the past 50 years? Because the whole concept of the synods that came out of the Second Vatican Council, the reason why Paul VI established this institution was to carry on something. There was something that happened at the council that they wanted to continue, that they wanted to allow the Spirit to work in the church, the dialogue between the bishops of the world and the Pope to continue. But if it seems like such a surprise to us now that we're having this open, honest discussion with Pope Francis, what does that say about the past 50 years of synods of bishops?
Well, you know, there's been a lot of accusations that this synod is being manipulated, and that the last one was. I think those who are making those accusations have very little historical knowledge. I've watched here synods where the Secretary General of the Synod came in to the rapporteurs and said, you don't put on this question, you don't put on this question. One relator, that's like the equivalent of Cardinal Erdo today, but in a past synod, he told me I was to give my speech, and they looked at it and said, remove that and remove this. There were topics not on the table. There was a climate of control. And that is one of the big differences. And so now people feel free to speak their minds, speak what's in their heart. And this is what the Pope has wanted. And this goes back to the Second Vatican Council. And I think this is a very new edition of the Second Vatican Council, if you wish, because it's opening to try to connect with the modern world, to connect with where people are. Single mothers who are bringing up a family, poor people who are struggling or perhaps running away from war or trying to be refugees, people in the big megalopolises who are in different situations, living together because they can't afford a house, or maybe divorced and remarried at certain levels. And the Pope is saying we have got to talk with real people, not with the people of whom we have an image of in our head. We've got to talk with the grassroots. And I think this is what the Second Vatican Council did. It was called, it brought the church into the modern world in many ways. And this synod is bringing the church into the 21st century. Cardinal Martini, before he died,
he's the former Archbishop of Milan and also a Jesuit.
Also a Jesuit and the former Archbishop of Milan and the head of the Biblical Institute and the Gregorian University, one of the towering figures of the end of the last century. He said before he died, the church is 200 years behind.
I remember it was, I think, 2012, so it was before Francis was elected,
yes,
but it was very...
less than a year. It was the August before he was elected, or
yeah.
maybe about a year before he was elected. But I think this is what this synod is doing. It is bringing the church and the modern world together, and it's not going to get a clean picture because there are many messy situations. But it's opening dialogue. It's not a question of confrontation. And this has been one of the hallmarks of Francis's pontificate from the beginning, to encourage the culture of encounter, not giving space to the culture of confrontation. Because if you're clashing with the other person, he's not going to listen to you and you're not getting anywhere with him. But if you can sit down, in Cuba it was very interesting when he met the young people, and he said, you you have differences from religious point of view, political point of view, ideological point of view, but you work together on the common elements. And then once you've built a friendship with the other person, then you're able to talk about the more difficult things. I think this is what's happening here. The Pope is talking about mercy. Some have wanted the Pope, the Church, to just emphasize doctrine, emphasize the teaching, even if nobody was listening. And what Francis is saying, you reach out to people like Jesus did in the Gospel. For me, Francis is a walking image of the Gospel. And he's saying, and I find that many bishops are now beginning to listen to him. Some were a little spaced out by what he was saying at the beginning. They didn't quite know where it was going. And now they're beginning to see, because they see the people in the streets. They see non-believers, non-Christians listening to him. He spoke to the United Nations on the 25th of September. I was there in the General Assembly Hall when he spoke. You had more than 150 heads of state come to listen to him. The German Chancellor, she flew in to be there at 4 o'clock in the morning in New York so she could be there. They're listening. And why are they listening? Because he's talking about the issues that are the issues of the people.
That's fascinating. Let's talk about something else that's very obvious at this synod. I mean, the Pope is certainly encouraging the bishops to move down this path of synodality, but not everybody seems to be getting on board. And the image that people have from the outside is that all of a sudden we have this divided church, and this openness has sparked division in a sense. When you look at the group of bishops who is here, who is having a lot of difficulty with what Francis is proposing and the direction that this synod is going, what are they concerned about? What is their big fear?
First of all, I like to describe the synod like Noah's Ark. You've got everything in it. And I think people have been trained, many of them trained here in Rome. They've been trained in one way of looking at the world, one way of thinking. Many of them have what is known as a deductive method. So you have got your ideas, you've got your doctrine, and so everything is deduced from that. And then there are others who, like Francis, operate in the inductive method. So you start with reality, and you say, what's there? And you try to see what is the gospel saying to this situation. Open your hearts, open your minds. Maybe what you know is part of a much bigger thing. But for some it's very difficult. They've lived their lives that way, and they feel that the Catholic truth, the Catholic faith, the Catholic doctrine is somehow at risk. They forget that the Pope is, as he said the other day, he's the guarantor of unity and the faith of the Church. They seem to forget that in certain moments, and this is sad, because despite all their theology, some of them seem to, in a certain moments, to forget a part of the theology.
In the middle of this synod, you did a very important interview with Cardinal Donald Wuerl, who's the Archbishop of Washington. There were some tensions inside the synod itself, as we've been discussing. There was a group of bishops and cardinals who were a little bit uneasy, had concerns about the process, how the synod was developing, the direction it was going, and that perhaps the synod was premeditated, that the outcome was already certain because there was a small group of people who had been in charge of pushing it into a certain direction. And you did this interview with Cardinal Wuerl, and he sort of categorically denied that there was any kind of manipulative energies within this synod. And he said something very interesting about Pope Francis. He said, the Pope is not saying anything that is not the orthodox teaching of the Church.
Cardinal Wuerl has been at 7 synods. He's a veteran. He's also known as a man who is dead center. He's never been on the very progressive left or on the very conservative. He's been known in the American Church as a man dead center. He's a man who carries weight. He's a man who's embraced Francis' pontificate really, totally. he was disturbed by seeing suggestions from his fellow bishops, cardinals, in the public forum, but also they're speaking behind the scenes with journalists, which gave the impression, one, that the synod was somehow being manipulated by a clique under Francis, that somehow the outcome was being predetermined, and that somehow this would be destructive to the Catholic faith or damage the Catholic faith or undermine the Catholic faith. You can choose your word. And he felt this was such a false reading of the reality. And I think he felt very strongly that to imply even hint that the Pope was somehow trying to pull the wool over the eyes of all the bishops, 270 Synod Fathers, that somehow the Pope was manipulating like a puppeteer people to get an outcome that he wanted, is so, first of all, such a real affront to the Pope. That's how, I think that's how the cardinals see it. And it's so false. It's not true. And he said, how can you manipulate a synod where in the groups, you have 13 groups, you elect the chairman of the group, and you elect the rapporteur of the group. They're elected by the members of the group. The group checks and approves the final document. Then it goes to the commission, and they have the possibility to say, no, you've left out this. How is it manipulated? So this was a false charge. But the consequence of this was being seen outside, giving the impression before even the synod closed that somehow that synod was less than true, that somehow it was not a right process. And so the consequence is to damage the conclusions of the synod. And I think Cardinal Wuerl felt very strongly about it. And he said in the interview with me, he said, I ask myself how they can think this, how they can say it. And his conclusion was, perhaps, he said, I wonder if it is really that they don't like this Pope and the church that he is urging, trying to build, they somehow feel threatened by it. I've never seen John Paul II challenged in the way Francis has been. I've never seen Benedict XVI challenged in the way he has been. And my understanding of how those papacies went, people may well have been in difficulty if they challenged it like that.
Let's take a look at what the impact or the conclusion of this synod might be. You know, we've gone through this two-year plus journey, if you consider the original consultation, the questionnaire that was sent out to all the local churches at the end of 2013. And there's much expectation. There's clearly, I think, from the discussions, not unanimous opinion about some of the very complex issues facing the families. If you read the reports of the 13
Sure.
small language groups, for example, the synod is going to produce a text that's going to be given to the Pope, and then we move forward from there. But what do you expect, or what do you anticipate will be the conclusion of this synod, or how will it play out going forward?
I think that the first thing I would hope would come out of the synod is a different mentality, a mentality that's more, an attitude that's more, a church that's more like Francis is suggesting. In other words, a church that's listening, that church is trying to meet people where they are and trying to understand people where they are. And at that point you have some possibility of what you call evangelization, or helping people to reach greater maturity in the faith or in understanding. You open the doors. So what I will be looking for in the end of this synod is, first of all, that final document, does it close doors or does it leave doors open? I think that will be a very important indicator. And then I expect the Pope to either come up with an exhortation or an encyclical or something as a result of this, which will then carry the process much further forward and will reach a much wider audience, people as well as bishops. And I think also, the families will, there's a general feel, Okay, there is perhaps 90% of the discussion people agree on. We have to help the families in immigration, the migrants. We have to help the one-parent families. We have to try and do something to help the people who are poor, the people who are suffering violence in the family. I think that the church is growing in sensitivity, both with the Synod and, of course, I think the wider pontificate of Francis. And then an immediate follow-up to the Synod is the Jubilee of Mercy. Now, it will be very interesting to see what Francis does this, because he's insisting on the corporal works of mercy. You visit the sick, you visit prisoners, and so it's a doing church, not just a talking church that he's trying to get. He wants them to live the gospel, not just to talk about the gospel. And I would hope that that will be one of the consequences of the Synod.
I want to end by giving you the opportunity to share a story that you shared with me before we did this interview. It's really wonderful because you've had your eye on Jorge Mario Bergoglio for a very long time. And I remember when we spoke, we did an interview with you just before the conclave started in 2013. I think you were the only person that I spoke to who predicted that Bergoglio would be elected. Talk to me a little bit about what you saw happening before Francis was elected, why you followed this man so closely, and why you thought there was something very special about him.
I met him for the first time when he got the red hat in February 2001. And I remember I just went and said hello to him. He didn't know me from Adam. But I got the sensation then that there's something very different about this man. And that sensation never left me. I felt, and then I saw him in the Synod of, I think, September or October 2001, just after 9/11, when he took over from Cardinal Egan as the relator in the Synod. And I heard Synod Father saying, there's something particularly special about this man. And at that point, he went on the radar screen of some cardinals. I got to know him at a personal level over the years, and the more I knew of him, the more I was convinced that he could become Pope. It didn't happen in 2005, but even in 2012, I was still felt there was still a couple of more years where he still had a possibility.
But he was getting ready for retirement,
yes,
right?
Yes. I remember meeting him in the December 2012 in Buenos Aires, and with my wife, and when we met him. And I remember looking at him, and he was telling us I was preparing it. He'd got the room in the old retired priest's home and everything, number 13, and he was going through all his correspondence and everything. I remember just looking at it. I said, I can't believe, I didn't say this to him, but I thought to myself, I can't believe it's finishing here, because I saw this man had so much in him, and to kind of close a door on that, I couldn't believe it. And then when Benedict resigned and the conclave started, when he went into conclave, I expected him to come out Pope.
Well, there's something about him certainly that has lit the world on fire now. So I think the rest of the world now sees what you saw for all those years.
But what Latin Americans saw, because in Aparecida in 2007, he was voted as the main chief editor of their document by 90-something% of the votes. He was the leader of the Latin American church, but it was not perceived. It was not grasped here so much. They saw it, but it was at the end of the world. It wasn't at the center. And then the center, the end of the world came to the center. And the history of the church has been changed.
And it's still moving forward. It's a wonderful historic moment that we're all living through. Jerry, I want to thank you so much for speaking to us. It's always wonderful to get your deep insights on what's happening in the church. Thank you. Really appreciate it.